teach you tips for how your life can be the best it could possibly be. So last week we went over, the month of May, we're going over some of the principles of unity, those basics that we all need to know. There's one power and presence. We went over that last week. We talked about it in detail. We each have the ability to connect with that power and presence. Our thoughts have power. Prayer is essential, and we live these truths that we know. We talked a little bit last week about the history of unity. It was new to some of you. We are going to give, at the end of the series, we're giving a handout with all of this information on it. If you're not aware, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore founded Unity in 1889. Myrtle had been suffering from some ailments that she had from childhood. And through prayer and affirmations that she learned from some other New Thought teachers, she was healed. Then everybody she knew wanted to know how she was healed, so she began sharing her story. They began putting these tips on paper, publishing them, and then they bought some property about 15 miles southeast of Kansas City, and it's all history from there. It became Unity World Headquarters. So what we're talking about today is we're going to go beyond the first principle. And Charles Fillmore said, you must first enter into the understanding that God, omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, is the source, and that you can draw on this source without limit. So we're going to call that the true point of beginning today. That's the true point of beginning. And principle 2 says that we are all connected to this source. Now, don't let the terminology get you down. If I say source, if I say the divine, if I say God, if I say good, the creator, whatever, just know that we are talking about that one power and that presence in the universe. That's God. That's what we're referring to. And then one other question that may come up, and I'm just going to address that right now, and that is, where do we see Jesus in all of this? Yes, we live by the teachings of Jesus, but he's the one that told us that we can do what he did. We see him as the one person that lived on this earth that was able to embody, embrace, and become the Christ as we knew it. But he said we can do that too. So that's how we look at that. So, of course, last week we talked about the origin of unity, these principles. And you know the origin of the universe has been debated, I'd say, as long as there have been humans on this earth. That is a subject that has been debated. One of the sweetest debates, though, that I can think of was told of a lecture of William James was giving a lecture on cosmology and the structure of the solar system. And he was accosted by a little old lady. She said, "Your theory that the sun is the center of the solar system and the earth is a ball which rotates around it has a very convincing ring to it, Mr. James. But it's wrong. I've got a better theory," she said. "And what is that, madam?" he inquired politely. "That we live on a crust of earth which is on the back of a giant turtle," she said. and not wishing to demolish this little theory by bringing to bear the masses of scientific evidence that he had, he decided to gently dissuade her by making her see some of the inadequacies of her position. "If your theory is correct, madam," he replied, "what does that turtle stand on?" "You're a clever man, Mr. James. You think you're going to trick me up. That's a very good question," she replied, "but I have an answer to it. And it's this. The first turtle stands on the back of a second, far larger turtle, who stands directly under him." "But what does the second turtle stand on?" he persisted. To this, the little old lady crowed triumphantly, "It's no use, Mr. James. It's turtles all the way down." Turtles. There have been some absurd theories out there, haven't there? It's like the little boy I spoke of last week that came home telling his father about this story he had heard in Bible school, and he was repeating it, but he put some technographics into it. And the father questioned him and said, "I don't think you heard it that way, did you?" He said, "Well, no, but if you heard it the way they told it, you'd never believe it." And I think that's what makes us so unique. I love unity because of that. You could say we're spiritual, but not religious. And I like that too. We're not going to cling to some old worn out stories that don't make sense. We like the practical and something that we can see, something that we know can work. And one of my favorite authors, and I know I've shared this with you at some point, was Reverend Eric Butterworth, probably one of the best known unity ministers that has lived. In one of his essays, he wrote, "Civil engineers use a term that's perfectly applicable to man in his journeys through life: the true point of beginning. In surveying a piece of land, there's always a starting point, which is clearly marked and identified. After establishing this starting point, the legal description may be described as follows: north 19 degrees, 21 minutes, 11 seconds, thence east, and therefore, that's the true point of beginning in surveying. And for man, human, woman, the true point of beginning is the realization of the truth of our oneness with God." So that's what we're talking about here today, is the true point of beginning. Something we can believe, something that we can know is true, and we can hang our hat on that. Something we can trust in and depend upon. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for a God, a source, creator, universe that we can believe in. So it is with us. Jesus said, "God is spirit, and they that worship must worship in spirit and truth." So if God is spirit, so are we. And one of the true points of beginning is learning who we are. God is the source, and we have those divine qualities. And as long as we know who we are, the true person, the true person within, without the ego, without the separation. There's no separation unless we consider there is. Did you know that? There is no separation unless you feel there is separation. Think of spirit the way you think of electricity. It only works if we turn it on. We don't need to understand all the science behind it, do we? We don't even need to be an electrician. We just have to have faith in it and know that it's there. And when we turn on the switch, it will be there for us. The same electricity, illumination shines forth on all. That same electricity shines on the local food kitchen as well as the Queen's Tea Party. You know that, right? We all know that. Let's think of spirit the same way, God, the essence of the divine. One of the things that always gives me comfort too, I love to, when we're on a flight and you go through an airport, and I know some of you have seen this, you'll see someone that's been on a long overnight flight, and they have the trust in everything around them to go lay down in a corner. That's a lot of trust, isn't it? We know that we don't trust many places out there in the world these days. But just think about that. Some young person that has the trust, they're so tired, all they need to do is lay down their weary body and head. Just find a corner, they lay down and rest. They have no fear, no worry. Why? Because they know they're in a place, this place, although it's an airport, there's plenty of light, there's plenty of security and safety around. What if we could feel that way, that comfort, that love, as if we are being held by the one power and the one presence? God, the one light. I like to think of that sometimes when I think of being comforted and how much trust. I want to have that much trust in everything I do. So if man is an expression of God, then man's role is to express, like, let thy will be done on earth, just as it is in heaven. There was a man that once strolled down the aisle of a passenger train, and he noticed there were two young men having a chess game, and one of the contestants, a teenager, was about to concede defeat when the man in the aisle remarked that there was one more move. Don't give up yet. And so the teenager allowed the man to sit down, and pretty quickly he had moved his party out of that corner into a place where he actually won the game. And it told the two teenagers, they exchanged information, and he told them as he was leaving to just remember, there's always, always, always one more move. So that same young man, that teenager who almost lost the game, found himself, he was cut off, he was in a field of battle, cut off from his unit, alone in a foxhole under heavy fire. The enemy patrols were closing in on him. All seemed lost. Suddenly he remembered those words. There's always one more move. So he prayed. He said, okay, let God take over. I'm done here. I don't know what else to do. And all of a sudden, he was told to shout out loud, throw down your weapons, you're surrounded, in a commanding voice. And guess what? The enemy threw down their weapons. They thought they were surrounded. His voice had the command of God or a godly being in it with such force that they believed him. He said that he remembered those words throughout his life. There's always one more move. And remembering that saved not only his life, but the lives of several others. If we could just get fixed in our minds, we are God's child, his living enterprise. We are God with skin on. Do you like that? So as we ask ourselves and who the divine self is, well, we can separate ourselves from the ego. We might ask ourselves, who am I? Who am I? And truth number one is we are divine spiritual beings. And the truth number two is God is always present in our lives because everything is God. God is the creator, the creative process, and the creation of all that is. There is nothing that is not God. It's all God. Sometimes, though, as we're checking our ego, we need to do an assessment and do a self-awareness. We need to do this pretty often. Maybe once a day might be appropriate. I'll let you decide after I tell you this next little story. Sometimes the ego can convince us that we're superior. Can it? We talk down to people. Sometimes it can convince us we're inferior. And we talk up to people. Sometimes, if we're feeling superior to others, such as there's this pompous colonel who had just been promoted and moved into a new plush office. He was sitting at his desk one morning when a private knocked on the door. Conscious of his new position, the colonel told the private to enter. Then, wanting to be real impressive and impress this young man, he picked up the phone, although no one's there, right? He's just wanting to impress. So he says into the phone loudly, "Yes, General, I'll be seeing the brigadier this afternoon, and I'll pass along your message. In the meantime, thank you for your good wishes, sir. Please say hello to your wife and children for me. So feeling as though he had sufficiently impressed the young enlisted man, he asked, "Now, what do you want, young man?" So the young private stuttered. He said, "Well, nothing really important, sir. I just came to hook up your phone." Maybe we need to be reminded of that little story every morning when we feel superior. But most times I think that we feel like we're not smart enough. We're not as smart as other people. We didn't have as impressive a background. Our family wasn't good enough, smart enough, whatever. We can come up with so many reasons that we're not good enough, can't we? But one of the first things I want you to remember when you're considering these principles is that if we want to be open to the divine within, the true point of beginning, is to know what we're opening up to actually believe there is a God, a loving presence, and that we have a connection, we have access to it. So that's the true point of beginning, that we have access to that. What does that take? Well, walking this human path, it takes a lot of awareness and questioning ourselves. Now, we don't walk around all the time in this perpetual state of asking ourselves those questions. People would think we were crazy, wouldn't they? But the truth is, if we would just catch ourselves when we're thinking something other than, I am a powerful child of God. When we're thinking that we're less than, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we couldn't possibly finish this program. That's only for people more intelligent than me, you might say to yourself. And that's when we need to be aware of those thoughts that are holding us back. Be aware of the situations where you feel that you are little with a small God. My God is big. I want your God to be big too. And as we go on out into the world, I want us to be the divine with skin on. Can we do that? Like the little girl that is sobbing in her room at night, and she's so afraid, and her mother comes in and says, now, honey, you know that God's always there protecting you and surrounding you. And she says, I know, but I want somebody with skin on. So sweet. A motherly embrace, a kindly word. I hope because today's Mother's Day that we can remember, we can be aware where we are being godly or we're being ungodly. Whether we are believing and trusting, like the one laying over in the corner in the airport, we are believing and trusting that we are protected, we're cared for, and we're loved. I thank you so much for being here today. You are my favorite people in the whole world. I hope you know that. Now let's just go out and be God with skin on, okay? Thank you for your time.